The train was never supposed to be that crowded on a Tuesday night. I remember thinking that, a small, useless thought drifting through my exhausted mind as I pressed myself against the metal pole near the doors, my feet aching inside shoes that had seen too many double shifts. The 10:47 line from Midtown back to my neighborhood in Queens was usually half empty by the time it reached my stop. A handful of night shift workers, maybe a college student or two buried in headphones, the occasional person who'd stayed too long at a bar. Familiar faces I'd never actually met. A quiet kind of company. That night, though, the car was packed. Some event downtown had let out. I'd seen the remnants of it spilling into the station. Women in heels carrying their shoes, men loosening ties, everyone loud and warm with whatever they'd been drinking. They'd flooded the platform and swallowed every inch of space, pushing me further down the car than I normally stood, into a corner near the rear door where the overhead light flickered every few minutes, like it was making a decision. I was 26 years old, working as a catering server for Harmon & Associates events, and I was so tired that my vision had developed a faint, persistent blur at the edges. Not dangerous, just the specific kind of exhaustion that becomes background noise after a while. I'd been on my feet since 6 that morning, carrying silver trays through the ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, keeping my expression pleasant and neutral, while people reached past me without looking. It was a skill I'd developed without meaning to, becoming invisible in a room full of people, moving without disturbing the air. My bag was heavy on my shoulder, black server's uniform folded inside, sneakers I'd changed into the moment my shift ended, a bruised apple I hadn't had time to eat. I shifted it to my other side and exhaled slowly, watching the dark tunnel walls rush past the scratched windows. That was when I noticed him. Not with alarm. Not at first. More the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit the frame of a familiar painting. He was seated, which was unusual given how crowded the car had become. Everyone around him was standing, yet there was a full seat empty on either side of him, as if the crowd had collectively, instinctively decided to leave a margin. He wore a black suit, the kind that didn't come off a rack, the kind that was measured and constructed specifically for the body inside it. His white dress shirt was open at the collar, and even from where I stood, I could see the dark edges of a tattoo climbing the side of his neck, intricate and dense, disappearing beneath the fabric. He was young. That surprised me. I'd expected someone older. I'm not sure why I formed an expectation at all, given I didn't know him. But he couldn't have been much past 30, if that. His face was sharp and composed in a way that felt almost architectural. Clean jaw, dark eyes set beneath brows drawn into a slight, permanent tension. His black hair was swept back, a single strand fallen loose across his forehead in a way that looked accidental, but somehow wasn't. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't reading anything. He was simply sitting, both hands resting on his knees, watching the middle distance with an attention that struck me as deeply strange for a subway car at nearly 11 at night. Around him, 2 men stood, not holding the poles, not looking at their phones either. Standing, aware. One near the door, one slightly behind. I noticed the way their eyes moved across the car in slow, steady sweeps, the way soldiers might clear a room, though the word soldier didn't come to me then. I filed it somewhere in the back of my mind under not my concern, and looked away. The train lurched. It was a mechanical shudder, the kind that happened sometimes on this line. A grinding hesitation between stations that the MTA had apparently decided to accept as a permanent feature of existence. Everyone swayed. Bags knocked into strangers. A woman grabbed her partner's arm. I grabbed the pole harder and kept my footing. But the apple, the bruised, sorry apple I'd tucked into the side pocket of my bag, did not keep its footing. The lurch knocked my bag sideways. The pocket gaped. And I watched, with the slow-motion clarity of pure exhaustion, as it rolled across the floor of the train car, past 2 pairs of expensive shoes, and came to rest directly against the polished black Oxford of the man in the suit. Nobody moved. The two standing men looked at it. Then they looked at me. My face went warm. I straightened and took a careful step forward through the crowd, keeping my voice low and neutral. The same voice I used when I was invisible at work. "Sorry, that's mine." I bent down to retrieve it, and that was when he moved, not away, not with irritation, but with a stillness that suddenly sharpened into something deliberate. His hand came down before mine reached the floor. Long fingers, one ring on the middle finger, a flat black stone set in silver. He picked up the apple with a calm that seemed entirely disproportionate to the moment, and held it out toward me without a word. I looked up at him from where I was crouched. He was already looking at me, not glancing, not the brief, polite acknowledgement of a stranger returning a dropped item. Looking. With those dark, precise eyes that seemed to register everything at once. My face, my uniform bag, my tired posture, the worn heel of my left shoe. I felt, in the span of 2 seconds, more thoroughly observed than I had in months. I took the apple. "Thank you," I said. He said nothing, but he didn't look away. I straightened and pressed back into my space by the door, turning to face the windows, my pulse doing something I chose not to examine. The flickering overhead light buzzed once and steadied. The train rolled on. 3 stops later, the crowd thinned significantly as the downtown passengers poured out at the transfer station, laughing and spilling onto the platform. The car fell quiet. I stayed where I was, apple held in my hand, watching the darkness outside. He was still seated. I became aware, without looking directly, that he had shifted slightly. Not toward me, but in a way that changed the geometry of the car, so that he was no longer facing forward, but at a slight angle, and the angle meant that if I turned my head even a fraction, we would be looking at each other again. I did not turn my head. The train rocked gently now, the aggressive sway of the crowded car replaced by something almost slow, almost rhythmic. My feet throbbed, my shoulders ached. The bruised apple in my hand smelled faintly sweet, and the flickering light had finally given up and gone steady, casting the rear of the car in a dim, amber tone that made everything feel slightly removed from reality. I must have closed my eyes for a moment. Just a moment. The kind of micro-sleep that ambushes you when your body has been pushing against its limits all day. The kind where you don't fall, you just soften, the tension draining from your neck and shoulders like water. I didn't hear him move. I didn't feel the seat beside me taken, because I wasn't sitting. I was still standing, my back against the door panel, my head tilted slightly to the right. What I felt was warmth and weight. Solid, unexpected, entirely real. Something, someone, had let their head come to rest against my shoulder. My eyes opened. In the amber half-light of the near-empty train car, I looked down at the dark sweep of hair resting against me, and my heart stopped constructing logical sentences. The man in the black suit, the man with the tattoos, and the 2 silent guards, and the eyes that had measured me like a map. His head had dropped sideways against my shoulder with the helpless, unconscious weight of someone who had finally, despite every intention, fallen asleep. The 2 guards were staring at me. Not with aggression, but with an intensity that made my throat close. One of them had taken a step forward, hand half raised, as if uncertain whether to intervene. The other had gone very still, his expression unreadable. I did not move. I could not have explained why, whether it was shock or fear, or the strange, irrational tenderness of watching someone powerful become, for one unguarded moment, simply human. But I stood absolutely still, the apple in my hand, his breath warm and slow against my collarbone, while the train carried us both somewhere neither of us had planned to go. I counted 4 stops before he stirred. 4 stops where I stood completely motionless, barely breathing, hyper-aware of every small detail. The slight heaviness of his head against my shoulder. The clean, dark scent of cedar and something warmer underneath. Like sandalwood pressed against skin that had been warm all day. His breathing was slow and even. The rhythm of someone genuinely, deeply asleep. Not the shallow doze of someone resting their eyes. His hands remained on his knees, still and composed even in unconsciousness, as if his body maintained its discipline even when his mind had finally surrendered. The guards hadn't moved. The one closer to me, broader, with a jaw like a concrete ledge, had settled into a watchful stillness that I was beginning to understand was his natural state. He wasn't threatening me, but he was tracking me the way a camera tracks movement, recording every micro-expression, every shift of my weight. I got the sense that if I reached into my bag too quickly, the atmosphere in the car would change in a way I wouldn't recover from easily. So I held my apple, and I didn't move. The other passengers who remained in the car, an older woman with grocery bags, a teenager asleep across 2 seats, had no idea. They were wrapped in their own exhaustion, their own small worlds. Whatever was happening in the rear corner of the 1047 train was invisible to them. I was good at invisible. I had practice. What I didn't have practice with was this particular brand of impossible. I work catering events, I reminded myself, with the desperate internal voice of someone trying to locate the shore. I carry trays. I refill water glasses. I go home to a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, where the radiator makes a sound like a dying instrument every night in winter. This is not my life. This is not something that happens to people like me. And yet his hair was soft-looking, the kind of black that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. And there was a small scar near his temple, faint, older, that I noticed only because his face was 6 inches from mine, and I had nothing else to do but notice things. The train announced my stop. The automated voice was cheerful and indifferent the way only machines can be. Next stop, Roosevelt Avenue. Transfer available. I had a decision to make. Waking him felt like touching a live wire with bare hands. Not because I thought he'd hurt me, or not only because of that, but because there was something almost sacred about the accidental vulnerability of what was happening. This man, whoever he was, whatever those quiet guards implied about the shape of his life, had let down his guard in the most human way possible. And he'd done it on my shoulder, which meant that when he woke, I would be the first thing his eyes found. I was not ready to be looked at like that again. But the doors would open in 40 seconds, and I lived here, and I had a 6 a.m. start tomorrow at a private luncheon in the East 50s, and my feet were actively informing me that they had reached the end of their goodwill. I shifted, slowly, carefully, the way you move when you're trying not to disturb something fragile, tilting my shoulder just enough to change the angle. His head lifted. He was awake before it fully left my shoulder. Not groggily, not with the disoriented blinking of someone dragged from deep sleep. His eyes opened with a clarity that was almost unsettling, like a light switched on in a dark room. Full presence, immediate. His gaze found mine in less than a second. The train stopped. The doors opened. Cold air breathed into the car from the platform. Neither of us spoke. His expression was, I searched for the word and couldn't find one that fit neatly. Not embarrassed. Not cold. Something between those 2 points, held with extraordinary control. A stillness that was doing a great deal of work. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his dark eyes stayed on my face with that same total attention from before, only now there was something added to it. Something I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. This is my stop, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He said nothing, but his eyes moved, briefly, involuntarily, to the door, and then back to me. A calculation I wasn't meant to see. I stepped off the train, The doors closed behind me. I stood on the platform and watched the train pull away, my heart striking my ribs with the measured insistence of someone knocking on a door they're not sure will open. Through the scratched window, I caught a last frame of him, seated, both hands on his knees, watching me through the glass as the car moved, not turning away, watching until the darkness of the tunnel took him. I exhaled. The platform smelled like rain coming through the grates above, and old metal, and the particular urban loneliness of late-night transit. I stood there longer than I needed to, apple still in my hand, replaying the weight of those 4 stops. Then I went home. I told myself over the next 3 days that it was over. A strange moment on a crowded train, the kind of inexplicable thing that happened in a city this size, filed away and eventually dissolved into the general texture of memory. I had enough real concerns to occupy me. 2 back-to-back events that week, a rent check that needed to clear before Thursday, and a slow leak under my kitchen sink that my landlord had been promising to fix since October. Life had a reliable way of filling the space that strange moments tried to occupy. I was good at moving forward. It was, perhaps, the skill I'd developed most thoroughly, the ability to absorb something jarring and keep walking. My mother called it resilience. My college roommate had called it self-erasure, with slightly more accuracy. On Friday, I was assigned to a private dinner at Soren, a restaurant in the West Village that I'd worked twice before. High-end, discreet, the kind of place where the lighting was specifically calibrated to make powerful people feel comfortable. Private dining rooms with thick doors and no visible menus. Reservations that didn't appear in any public system. I arrived early, changed into my uniform in the staff room, and spent the first hour setting tables with the mechanical efficiency that came from doing the same gestures hundreds of times. Linen placement, crystal positioning, the specific angle of a knife against the fold of a napkin. The head server, Marcus, moved through the room with his tablet, assigning sections. Zoe, you've got room 3 tonight. 6 guests, private booking. Client requested minimal interruption. Top off glasses, clear courses, but don't linger. Understood. They arrive at 8. I noted it and continued setting up. Room 3 was the most private space in the restaurant, a separate paneled room at the end of a short corridor, accessible through a heavy door that muffled all sound from the main floor. I'd worked it once before, for a group of finance executives who'd spoken in low, careful tones the entire evening and left a 22% tip on a bill I wasn't allowed to see the total of. The room had a specific atmosphere, sealed, deliberate, designed for conversations that were not meant to travel. At 5 minutes past 8, I heard the door. I was positioned near the service station, back half turned, checking the temperature of the white wine in its ice bucket. I heard the group enter, the quiet authority of measured footsteps, the absence of the usual social noise that accompanied most parties arriving at a table. No overlapping conversation, no laughter, no chairs scraping carelessly. I turned to greet the table. He was already seated, not at the head of the table, slightly off-center, the way someone sits when they understand that the head of any table is wherever they choose to be. Black suit, different from before but identical in quality. White shirt, collar open by 2 buttons. The tattoo visible along the left side of his neck, climbing toward his jaw like dark ink pressed into pale stone. His eyes found me in the same instant mine found him. The recognition was mutual and immediate, and for a single electric second, the room narrowed to the distance between us. Then his expression did something almost imperceptible. A fractional shift, a controlled adjustment, like a door being carefully, deliberately closed. He looked away, picked up the leather-bound menu placed before him, said something in a low voice to the man on his left. I moved to the table. My training carried me forward when my instincts were doing something far less organized. I reached for the wine, keeping my expression neutral, my hands steady, performing the routine with the precision I always brought to work. the one place in my life where I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. "Good evening," I said to the table. "My name is Zoe. I'll be taking care of you tonight." The other guests acknowledged me briefly, efficiently, in the way of people accustomed to being served. All men, all composed, all in that same register of quiet, expensive authority. I poured the wine without incident. But as I reached across to fill the glass closest to him, protocol requiring me to serve from his left, I felt his gaze return, not glancing over, not a polite acknowledgement of the person filling his glass. The same total, precise attention from the train, from those 4 stops of amber light and cedar scent and impossible stillness. My hand did not shake, but the ice in the wine bucket shifted as I replaced the bottle. A small, sharp sound in the quiet room, and I saw, in my peripheral vision, the corner of his mouth move. Not a smile. Something more contained than that. Something that knew things. I stepped back to the service station and faced forward and understood, with a clarity that settled into my chest like cold water, that this was not going to be a story I filed away. The dinner lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above the service station with the focused attention of someone waiting for a verdict. Not out of impatience. I'd learned long ago that impatience was a luxury servers couldn't afford, but because the room had developed a specific kind of pressure that I needed to measure against something concrete. Time, degrees, the angle of a wine bottle. Anything with a fixed answer. He ate with the same economy he seemed to apply to everything. Deliberate choices, no excess. He spoke rarely, and when he did, the men around him oriented toward him like compass needles finding north. Subtle, immediate, involuntary. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody finished a sentence he'd started. There was a hierarchy in that room that required no announcement, and he sat at its center with the ease of someone who had never known any other arrangement. I refilled glasses. I cleared courses. I did not linger. But twice in 2 hours and 14 minutes, I felt his gaze follow me across the room with that same unhurried precision, and both times it lasted long enough that I had to make a conscious decision about where to look. I chose the middle distance. Professional. Neutral. The same face I wore when the world was asking me to disappear. When the group finally rose to leave, I was positioned near the door, as protocol required. The other guests filed past with brief nods. The guard I recognized from the train, the broader one, concrete jaw, passed me last, paused almost imperceptibly, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decode. Not threatening, something closer to assessment. Then he was gone. He was the second to last to leave. He stopped. Not in front of me exactly, a foot to my left, which meant I had to choose between looking at him and looking past him. The distance was close enough that I caught it again. Cedar, sandalwood, something clean underneath. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a card. Plain, matte black, nothing printed on it except a number in small silver type. He held it out. I looked at the card, then at him. I started. "You don't have to call." His voice was low, each word placed with care, carrying the faint, precise architecture of someone who had learned English with complete intentionality. "But if something concerns you, or if you need something..." I stared at him. "Why would I need something from you?" The question came out more direct than I intended. The particular candor that surfaces when exhaustion strips away social polish. I expected something to shift in his expression. Irritation, perhaps, or the cool withdrawal of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. Instead, something moved behind his eyes, brief and complicated. "You've been on your feet since this morning," he said. "You almost didn't make it off the train fast enough. And you're here again tonight." The accuracy of that landed strangely, not as surveillance, though the rational part of my mind noted that it could be read that way. It landed as attention, the kind that sees the shape of a person rather than just their surface. I took the card, not because I intended to use it, because my hand moved before my reasoning caught up, and by the time I'd recalibrated, it was already in my palm, the matte surface cool against my fingers. He left without another word. I stood in the doorway of room 3 for a long moment, the card held loosely, the restaurant noise filtering in from the main floor, like a reminder that the rest of the world was still operating normally. Then I tucked it into the pocket of my server's apron and went to clear the table. I didn't call. Of course I didn't call. I put the card in the small ceramic dish on my kitchen counter, where I kept things I hadn't decided what to do with. A spare key, a button from a coat I no longer owned, a birthday card from my mother. And I left it there. Some mornings I walked past it without looking. Other mornings I'd find myself standing in front of it with my coffee going cold, reading those silver digits as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. 2 weeks passed. I picked up extra shifts to cover a medical bill I'd been ignoring since August. A friend of a friend reached out about a waitressing position at a rooftop bar in Brooklyn, and I went to the interview and was politely told I didn't have the right look, which was a sentence I'd learned to absorb without visible reaction. I called my mother on Sunday the way I always did, and she asked if I was eating properly, and I said yes, and she didn't believe me, and we both pretended she did. The city moved around me the way it always had. Fast, indifferent, occasionally beautiful in the aggressive way of places that know they don't have to try. I was leaving work on a Wednesday evening, a corporate lunch at a midtown hotel, 3 hours of standing near a buffet station and directing guests to the gluten-free options, when I noticed the car. Black, long, parked along the opposite curb with the engine running. Tinted windows. A driver visible in the front seat who was not looking at his phone, not doing anything, just sitting with the alert stillness of someone being paid to be present. I told myself it was nothing. New York had black cars everywhere. It meant nothing. I started walking toward the subway. The car didn't move. I was half a block away when my phone rang. An unknown number that somehow, without logic, without any evidence, I already knew. I stopped walking. Answered. "There's a problem." His voice, low and without preamble. "Your coworker, Marcus." I turned slowly on the sidewalk. "What about Marcus?" "He's been telling people things about the clients at Soren. Names, reservation times, who sits in which room." A pause, measured and deliberate. "He sold that information to someone who intends to use it badly. Tonight." My stomach went cold. "How do you know that?" "Because it's my table he sold." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard in weeks. "The restaurant has already been notified," he continued. "But you were scheduled to close tonight. I wanted to make sure you weren't there when this becomes complicated." I looked at the black car across the street. "That's you," I said. Not a question. "That's my driver. You're watching me." Another pause. This one different. Not calculated, but something adjacent to careful. "I'm making sure you get home." Every reasonable instinct I possessed lined up to tell me that this was precisely the kind of situation I should walk away from. A man I didn't know, with guards and black cars and tables at private restaurants where conversations didn't travel, was telling me he'd been tracking my schedule well enough to know I was supposed to close tonight. That was not reassurance. That was exactly the kind of thing that should make a person walk faster toward the nearest populated area. And yet... "Marcus has worked there for 3 years, I said. My voice sounded strange to me. Careful, as if I were carrying something fragile. "He has a daughter in middle school. I know." Something in his tone shifted. Not softness exactly. Something more like acknowledgement. "That's not my decision. What happens to him is between him and the people he sold to. I'm only responsible for what happens on my side." That's a very clean way to describe it. Most things are cleaner when you remove the parts that don't belong to you. I stood on the sidewalk in the November cold, the city roaring past on all sides, and looked at that black car with its running engine and its still, watchful driver, and understood that I was standing at the edge of something that had no clean boundary. "I'm not getting in that car," I said. A beat. Then, "All right. I don't know you." "No, and you've apparently been paying enough attention to my work schedule to know when I close, which is—" I searched for the word. "Significant." "Yes," he said. Simply, without apology or explanation. I pressed my free hand against my coat pocket and felt nothing there. The card was at home in the ceramic dish. But I knew the number now. It was already memorized, which said something about me that I wasn't quite ready to examine. "Is the restaurant actually in danger tonight?" I asked. "The situation is being handled. You don't need to go in." That's not what I asked. A silence, longer than the others. "Yes," he said finally. It was, past tense, already resolved, in whatever way things got resolved in the world that operated behind the smooth surface of private dining rooms and black cards with silver numbers. I closed my eyes briefly. Opened them. Okay, he repeated. "I'm taking the subway." "I know. Stop watching me get on the subway." The quietest thing happened then. So small I almost missed it. The faintest exhale on his end of the line. Not quite a laugh. Something that acknowledged the absurdity of two people having this specific conversation on a Wednesday evening in November without either of them knowing what to call it. "Good night, Zoe." He knew my name. Of course he did. I'd said it at the beginning of the dinner service, the way I always did. "My name is Zoe. I'll be taking care of you tonight." And he had kept it. Filed it somewhere with the same precision he applied to everything. I hung up, walked to the subway, did not look back at the car, but at the top of the station stairs, before I descended into the underground and lost signal, my phone buzzed once. A message from the unknown number. 4 words. Train was on time. I stood there reading it, the cold wind pulling at my coat, the city indifferent and enormous around me, and felt something I didn't have a name for yet. Something that lived between fear and gravity. The particular pull of a thing you know you should leave alone. I went down the stairs. He sent flowers on Thursday. No card, no name. Just an arrangement of deep burgundy peonies in a dark glass vase, delivered to my building by a man in a black coat who handed them to my neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, when I didn't answer. I was in the shower, and who was gone before she could ask any questions. She knocked on my door with them held out like evidence, her expression caught between delight and suspicion. "Someone knows where you live," she said. "Apparently," I said. I put them on the kitchen counter next to the ceramic dish. The card was still there. The flowers and the card occupied the same 6 inches of space, and every morning when I made coffee, I stood in front of both of them and had a conversation with myself that never reached a clean conclusion. I didn't call. But on Saturday I was assigned last minute to cover a private event at a gallery in Chelsea. A collection preview, invitation only. The kind of gathering where the art on the walls cost more than my apartment building. I took the shift because I needed the money, and because saying no to last-minute calls was a privilege I hadn't earned yet. I was 40 minutes into the event, moving through clusters of suited guests with a tray of champagne flutes when I felt it. The specific atmospheric change that I'd apparently already learned to recognize. A shift in the room's social gravity. A subtle reorientation of bodies toward a fixed point. I didn't have to look to know, but I looked anyway. He was near the far wall, standing in front of a large canvas, dark oils, abstract, something turbulent in the brushwork. He wasn't looking at the painting. He was looking at me. Across the full length of the gallery, through 20 people and the low amber lighting and the quiet string music coming from a quartet in the corner. He was looking at me with the focused calm of someone who had already decided something and was simply waiting for the information to travel. Beside him stood a woman, late 20s, dressed in ivory, her hair pinned with the effortless precision of someone with both the time and the assistance to achieve it. She said something to him, her hand resting on his forearm with the casual ownership of familiarity. He didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on me for 3 more seconds, measured, deliberate, and then turned his attention back to the canvas. I finished my circuit of the room and returned to the service station. My chest felt strange, tight in a way I categorized firmly as irrelevant. I didn't know this man. I had spoken to him twice in person and once on the phone. He had sent flowers to an address he shouldn't have known, which I had accepted and put in water because apparently my judgment had taken a leave of absence. Whatever the woman in ivory was to him was not my concern, and the tightness in my chest was simply the physiological response to an unexpected social situation. Nothing more. I picked up a fresh tray and went back out. 20 minutes later, Marcus appeared. Not Marcus from Soren. Marcus was gone from Soren. I'd learned through a co-worker text chain. Circumstances undisclosed. Effective immediately. This was Marcus from 3 years of shared shift schedules and staff meal complaints, and the particular camaraderie of people who were tired in the same way at the same time. He was standing near the gallery entrance in his street clothes, and the moment he saw me, his expression collapsed into something desperate and raw that I hadn't seen on his face before. Zoe. He crossed to me quickly, too quickly for the space. I need to talk to you. I set my tray down on a nearby surface. Marcus, I know what you're thinking. I know how it looks. His voice was low, his eyes moving around the room with a new, jagged awareness. I didn't know what they were going to do with it. I thought it was just someone wanted to know who was dining where. I thought it was a competitor thing, a business thing. Marcus. I kept my voice level. This isn't the place. I need you to tell him. He grabbed my wrist, not hard, but sudden, his fingers tight with urgency. I know you know him. I saw the way he looked at you at that dinner. I need you to tell him it was a mistake, that I didn't know. My daughter let go of my wrist. He did. Immediately, as if he'd only just realized he'd taken hold of it. But the damage was already mapped. I understood that a half-second later, when I registered the shift in the room. The broader guard, whom I'd privately named Concrete because I had to call him something, had materialized 6 feet away with the speed of a man who covered distances without appearing to move. His eyes were on Marcus with an attention that made the hair on my arm stand up. It's fine, I said, directing the words at Concrete without quite looking at him. We're fine. Concrete didn't move. Marcus. I turned back to him, keeping my voice steady. I hear you, but I can't carry a message like that. I'm not who you think I am to him. Marcus looked at me with the expression of someone who had been disabused of a simpler version of reality. Zoe. He sent someone to check on you the night everything happened at Soren, before anyone else knew there was a problem. I had nothing to say to that. He left shortly after, slipping back through the entrance the way he'd come in. I returned to my station, reclaimed my tray, and spent the next 30 minutes performing my job with the focused precision of someone using motion to prevent thought. At the end of the event, when the guests had thinned to a handful and the catering team was beginning breakdown, I felt him approach before I heard him. The particular quality of the air changed, that cedar and sandalwood presence, warm against the gallery's climate-controlled chill. You should have told me he was here. His voice came from slightly behind my left shoulder, low enough that only I could hear it. I turned. He was closer than I expected. Not inappropriately so, but close enough that I had to adjust my understanding of the space between us. His expression was composed, but there was something running beneath its surface like current beneath still water. "He wasn't a threat," I said. "He grabbed your wrist. He was scared and sorry. That's different from dangerous." Something moved through his jaw, a tightening, brief and controlled. "That distinction doesn't matter to me." "It matters to me." He looked at me for a long moment. The string quartet had packed up. The gallery was quieting around us, the last guests collecting their coats near the entrance. We were standing in front of the same dark canvas he'd been examining earlier. And up close, the painting was more violent than it had appeared from across the room. All collision and shadow, something barely contained within its frame. "The woman you were with," I said, because apparently I had decided that tonight was the night I stopped filtering myself. "Who is she?" His expression shifted in a way I hadn't seen before. Not closed down, but something more complex. He was quiet long enough that I prepared to retract the question. "Her name is Yuna," he said. "She is the daughter of a man I do business with. Her father has decided we should marry." The word marry landed in the quiet gallery with the weight of something structural. "And you?" I asked. "What have you decided?" "I haven't decided anything yet." I looked at the painting. "That seems like something you should probably decide." "Yes," he said. And then, after a pause that carried more than its length suggested, "It does." I finished breakdown, changed out of my uniform in the staff bathroom, and came out to find Concrete waiting near the gallery exit with the patient immobility of a feature of architecture. "I'm taking the subway," I said. "Mr. Han would like to offer." "Subway," I repeated. Concrete considered this, then stepped aside. Outside, the November air was bitter and direct. I pulled my coat closed and started toward the station, my footsteps steady on the wet pavement. I made it 1 block before my phone buzzed. "You called me Han." I stopped walking. I hadn't. I'd said his name once to myself, reading it off a business document a coworker had left out at Soren weeks ago. Seokjin Han. I hadn't said it aloud, not once. I typed back, "Concrete told you, 3 seconds. Then, who is Concrete?" Despite everything, the tight chest and the woman in ivory, and the word Mary sitting in the middle of my thoughts like an object I kept walking around. I laughed. Brief, involuntary, the kind that escapes before you've authorized it. My phone buzzed again before I could respond. "I need to tell you something. Not over the phone. Tomorrow. Breakfast. There's a place on Bank Street, Marin's, 9 o'clock. You're not working." It wasn't a question. He knew my schedule. I stood on the sidewalk, cold air sharp in my lungs, and looked at those words for a long time. The rational architecture of my life, the shifts, the rent, the careful distance I kept from things I couldn't afford, arranged itself on one side of a scale. On the other side, 4 stops on a late-night train, a bruised apple, cedar and sandalwood, and a man who had not yet decided anything, but was apparently beginning to. I typed back. 9 o'clock. Sent it before the scale finished tipping. Marin's was the kind of place that didn't advertise itself. No sign above the door, just a street number in brushed brass, and a single window with linen curtains drawn halfway. The kind of establishment that existed entirely through word of mouth among people who already knew. I stood outside at 8:58, my breath visible in the cold morning air, and understood that Seokjin Han did not do anything without intention. This place, this hour, this specific invitation, all of it chosen with the same deliberateness he applied to every word he'd ever said in my presence. I went in. He was already there. Of course he was. Seated at a corner table set slightly apart from the others, his back to the wall in the way I'd come to recognize as instinct rather than preference, a man who always knew where the exits were. Concrete was positioned near the entrance, a coffee in hand, performing a convincing impression of someone simply enjoying their morning. A second man I hadn't seen before stood near the rear, They were always there. I was starting to understand they always would be. Seokjin stood when I approached the table. The gesture was small and precise, and it undid something in me that I hadn't realized was held tight. "You came," he said. "You knew I would." "I hoped," he said, which was different, and we both knew it. We sat. A server appeared, and disappeared with the efficiency of someone well-trained in selective invisibility, a skill I recognized professionally. Coffee arrived, a small plate of pastries. The morning light came through the half-drawn curtains in pale, horizontal lines across the white tablecloth. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at it for a moment before he spoke. "My father built something," he said. "Over 30 years. From nothing. From worse than nothing. And when he died, he left it to me because I was the only one left who understood what it cost." He paused. "I was 22. I didn't want it. That didn't matter. I didn't speak. I understood instinctively that this was not a story he told, that the telling of it now was itself the significant thing. The structure requires certain alliances," he continued. "Yuna's father controls a network in the northeast that intersects with mine. A marriage would formalize the relationship, stabilize things." His eyes came up to mine. "It would also end something before it has the chance to become what I think it might become." The morning light held very still. "You don't know me," I said carefully. "We've had 3 conversations." 4, he said. "The train." "That wasn't a conversation. You were asleep on my shoulder." "I know." Something moved through his expression, not quite embarrassment, but its more composed cousin. "I haven't slept like that in 4 years. Not that easily." He set down his cup. "I don't know how to explain what that means without sounding like someone you should be more cautious of. I'm already cautious of you. I know that too." I looked at the pastry on my plate without seeing it. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, the city conducting its ordinary morning business with total indifference to what was happening inside this unremarkable room. "What happened to Marcus?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "He's alive. He lost his position with every establishment my organization has any connection to, which is a significant number. His debt to the people he sold information to has been settled. By me, because it was my table and therefore my problem to resolve cleanly." A pause. "His daughter started at a new school last week. Better district." I stared at him. "You paid his debt and moved his daughter to a better school." He was careless and frightened, not malicious. There's a code. He said it without ceremony, as if it were simply a fact of physics. Disproportionate response damages more than it repairs. Something I'd been holding tightly in my chest since that Wednesday evening on the sidewalk, since the train, honestly. Since the moment I'd looked down at dark hair resting against my shoulder, loosened in a way that felt irreversible. "The woman in ivory," I said. "Yuna." I called her father this morning. He held my gaze steadily. "The alliance will be formalized through a different structure, a business arrangement, not a personal one." It took 2 hours and was not a comfortable conversation. The corner of his mouth moved slightly. He was unhappy. "Seokjin, I made the decision last night," he said. "You asked me what I'd decided. I told you I hadn't decided anything yet. That stopped being true approximately 40 minutes after you walked to the subway." I pressed my hands flat against the table, grounding myself against the disorienting sensation of a conversation moving faster than my defenses could reorganize. "You understand what you're describing? What it would mean? Your life is not—" I searched for the word. "It's not safe. For someone next to you." "No," he said. With complete honesty, which I hadn't expected, and which was somehow more frightening than a reassurance would have been. "It isn't." I carry trays at catering events. I take the subway home at midnight. I have a radiator that sounds like it's in distress and a landlord who doesn't return calls. I heard my own voice, steady and strange. That's my life. It doesn't map onto yours. I'm aware of your radiator, he said. It was replaced yesterday. Your landlord was contacted. I opened my mouth, closed it. That was presumptuous, I said. Yes. You can't just fix things in my life without asking me. You're right. He didn't look remotely apologetic, but his voice carried something genuine. I'll ask, going forward. I wanted you warm. I wanted you warm. 6 words that bypassed every reasonable objection I'd assembled over the past 3 weeks and landed somewhere unguarded and essential. I looked at this man across a white tablecloth in a restaurant with no sign above the door, this man with his tattoos and his silent guards, and his code of disproportionate response, and his 30-year inheritance of dangerous things. And I understood, with the specific clarity that comes when you stop arguing with what's already true, that I was not going to walk away from this table the same person who had sat down. I have conditions, I said. Something shifted in his expression. Attention, sharpened. I keep my job, my apartment, my choices. I held his gaze. You don't make decisions about my life without my involvement. Not the radiator, not anything. Agreed. And if I tell you I'm taking the subway, you take the subway, he said. A pause. Concrete may happen to be on the same train. Seokjin. That one is non-negotiable, he said. And for the first time, the very first time, I saw it fully. Not the contained almost expression, not the fractional shift at the corner of his mouth. An actual, genuine, undisguised thing, brief and real and entirely human, transforming his face for a moment into something that looked dangerously like the person he might have been at 22, before his father's 30-year inheritance had settled permanently onto his shoulders. I felt the last carefully maintained distance between my judgment and what I actually felt collapse quietly, like a wall that had been structural once and simply wasn't anymore. Fine, I said. Concrete can ride the subway. He reached across the table, slowly, with the same deliberateness he brought to everything, giving me every opportunity to move away, and his hand came to rest over mine. Warm, steady, the flat black ring cool against my skin. I don't know how to do this gently, he said quietly. I want to be honest with you about that. The way when I want to protect something, I don't know how to do it in half measures. You'll need to tell me when I'm too much. I'll tell you, I said. I'm not quiet when something bothers me. I know. And the way he said it, not with resignation but with something that sounded almost like relief, told me that he had already understood this about me and had already decided it was not a problem, but a preference. We stayed at that table for another hour, drank 2 rounds of coffee. He told me about growing up between Seoul and New York, the particular displacement of belonging entirely to neither place. I told him about my mother in Atlanta, and the birthday card in my ceramic dish, and the way I'd learned to be invisible in rooms that didn't mean to exclude me, but managed it effortlessly anyway. He listened the way he did everything, completely, without interruption, as if whatever I was saying was the most important intelligence he'd received all week. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary Saturday morning, indifferent and enormous, and relentlessly alive. When we finally left, he walked me to the corner where Bank Street met the avenue. Concrete materialized at a respectful distance. The second guard remained invisible somewhere behind us. I'll call you tonight, Seokjin said. All right. He looked at me for a moment in the cold morning light, that precise, total attention that I had stopped trying to find unsettling, because it had quietly, without my permission, become the thing I looked forward to most. Then he lifted my hand and pressed his mouth to my knuckles, a gesture so deliberate and unhurried that the city seemed, for just that second, to pause around it. He released my hand and walked back toward the black car waiting at the curb, The door opened before he reached it. He got in without looking back, but the window lowered slightly as the car pulled away from the curb. And that was enough. That was exactly enough. I stood on the corner of Bank Street with my coat pulled close, the cold air clean in my lungs, watching the black car move into the ordinary current of a Saturday morning in New York. My radiator was fixed. Marcus's daughter was in a better school. Somewhere in a 2-hour conversation that had apparently not been comfortable, a different future had been quietly, irrevocably negotiated. I thought about the train, the amber light, the bruised apple. 4 stops of cedar and sandalwood and the specific, helpless weight of someone powerful becoming, for one unguarded moment, simply human against my shoulder. I had not planned any of this. But then, the most important things rarely announced themselves. They simply arrived, on a crowded Tuesday train, and rested against you like they had always known exactly where they belonged. I turned and walked toward the subway. And for the first time in longer than I could honestly remember, the city didn't feel quite so large.